The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the participants and do not reflect the opinions or beliefs of Marshall University, Marshall University Libraries, the Department of English, the College of Liberal Arts, Marshall University Film Studies, or HerdCon. Hello, everybody, and welcome to HerdCon Book Chats. And we're back again. It is I, Cody Lumpkin, and with Meghan Sexton-Harness. And we have two special guests with us this afternoon. We have Professor John Vielkind. He's a professor of philosophy here at Marshall University. He's the former chair of philosophy and then humanities. His specialization in Platonic dialogues, Nietzsche and Heidegger. And as I understand it, you'll be retiring at the end of this semester.
Will. Finally.
Well, best wishes in finishing the semester strong, and then congratulations and hope for a long and happy retirement.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Our other guest is Dr. E. Del Chrol, who is the chair of the Humanities Department at Marshall University and a professor of classics. His research is on the overlaps of public and private persuasion in first century Rome. He's working on two projects right now, one on game theory and the rules of romance in Roman love poetry, and one on testing modern theories of leadership to explore the character of one of Rome's greatest villains, Catiline. The latter is called The Dirtbag's Guide to Leadership. Dr. Chrol is the winner of 14 teaching awards, including the top one for the Society of Classical Studies, the West Virginia Foreign Language Teachers Association, and Marshall University. He has also conducted weddings for two of the people in this room.
Yes, and to be clear, we got married. You married us two separate people.
Yes.
Yes. So yeah.
So far, yes.
So far things are going well. So
all right,
they're holding up.
Can't complain.
Yeah. I was going to say one of the things that I credit, or one of the things I'm proud of, is that everybody I've married has stayed together. Not now. I should have done my own wedding, but that's a different story.
It's a good omen.
Yep.
So. Okay, so we're here. We're going to talk about today. We're going to do things maybe a little differently, but we're going to talk about probably the oldest text that we may yet talk about. And this is part of our continuing short book series where we'll be looking at shorter works of literature. If you're interested in, you maybe haven't been reading a lot lately and you want to get back into reading and finding some shorter works to look at to get you going again, this is one that I would encourage to give a shot, particularly in the realm of philosophy and classics. Today we're going to be discussing Plato's Symposium or Drinking Party, and we'll be using the 2000 just to make sure we're get your right translation, contemporary translation, the 2017 Focus Books translation, which is an imprint of Hackett Publishing, which is an excellent publisher of philosophical text. The translators were Eva Braun, Peter Kovalevich, and Eric Salem out of St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland. So this is a Socratic dialogue, and I guess maybe to ask you all, since your respective areas are classics and philosophy, so as, obviously coming to it as readers, but in your own particular discipline, how does that help you inform, or how do you understand something like the Symposium, given your particular areas of expertise and knowledge?
Well, one thing to say at the beginning is that the logos dimension of the dialogue, the main speaking, thematizing part, you could just say is on eros, on love, on the god eros, as it's called initially, but not later by Socrates. We'll see. And then the framework, in terms of the two principal deities, generally in reading Plato dialogues, you have, based on the apology of Socrates' defense, Socrates calls his philosophy a service to Apollo. And the god Apollo is mentioned here eventually in Aristophanes' speech, but initially the dialogue Symposium begins with the character Apollodorus, whose name in Greek means gift of Apollo, recollecting all of what's being told. Plato's writing it this way. Plato's writing it, but Plato's never a character in the dialogues. So you have Apollo literally mentioned in the name of the first character. And then shortly into the prologue, you have another god playing an equally important role, arguably, is Dionysus, god of the vine from which wine comes, so very significant for a drinking party. And then the other thing I tell my students in class is that Dionysus, he is a divinity, and he's usually listed as part of the Olympians, but he's the product of one human parent and one divine parent. So he had Zeus as his father.
He was busy.
And his mother was a woman named Semele, according to some versions of the mythos. So you have this crossing of divine and human, which will figure very much in the story of Eros as it comes to be told, finally by Socrates. So the mythos dimension of the dialogue, and those aren't the only two gods mentioned, but Apollo and Dionysus are really crucial, arguably, for reading this dialogue and in general for reading Platonic dialogues. And then the Socratic irony is a big deal thing all the way through Plato's dialogues, or at least one might mention that as something to look toward as you read. And everybody knows, as it were, generally speaking, in terms of Plato, that the way Plato writes the character Socrates wrote nothing. And he always claims to not know, or at least what he does claim to know is his own ignorance, so his awareness of his ignorance. But here, as the Symposium will begin, Socrates says that Eros, the subject, is something he knows about, is what he knows.
Yeah, he's knowledgeable in love.
Right,
matters.
so there's a certain irony. He who doesn't usually say he knows, but rather confesses his ignorance, claims to know something about Eros. And then, of course, one can check out his speech later on to see more about that. So that irony always is at issue. And then with this dialogue, you have the many speakers, and they all give speeches on love, and then Socrates would be the center. I mean, he really comes at the end of the line in a sense, but he's the center of the dialogue in many ways. And then, but right after Socrates comes Alcibiades, who is associated with Socrates and in the lover-beloved relationship. And Alcibiades is himself then, he's roaring drunk when he comes in. So he's an image of Dionysus, but he's going to praise, his speech is not on love, but it's on Socrates, namely on the lover of wisdom. So again, you have things that are on the face of it one thing, but then they're kind of turned sideways or upside down initially. And I always think of the whole dialogue as proceeding something along those lines.
It seems a little of the Plato's dialogues that I've read. It seems a little, maybe not wholly, but a little. It's atypical for most of them. It seems a little bit of a strange outlier, at least stylistically.
Yeah. This is, often it's said to be the most dramatic of the dialogues. But then I would say that all Plato's dialogue, all 30 plus dialogues that we have, they're all very dramatic in varying ways. But it's true, there are noticeable differences. And I suppose the dialogue Apology of Socrates, which is the only one with his name in the title, Socrates' name, I mean, that's kind of, a big deal thing for introduction to philosophy frameworks. And then if you have to add a few others, certainly the Phaedo, the picturing Socrates on the day of his death.
Yeah.
And that too is a recollection by the character Phaedo in that case of Socrates' last day. And then the Republic, of course, and the footnotes in the translation that I use here refer to a number of things from the Republic here and there. But then I would add the Symposium. So I mean, maybe those four: the Apology, the Phaedo, the Republic, and the Symposium might turn out to be the most, at least the ones I tend to use,
Yeah.
most familiar with.
Yeah. I will say, however you feel about Socrates and he's what he loves. He loves discourse. He loves philosophy. He loves dialoguing. He finds out he's dying the last day of his life. He's out there philosophizing and talking
Yes,
to people.
yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
however you feel about it, you got to respect the passion.
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, the passion. Yeah. And again, the Symposium addresses that passionate desire for wisdom, the love of wisdom.
So as a classicist, how do you view and bring to a work like the Symposium?
Yeah, so my approach is a bit different because I think of myself oftentimes as a social historian who's worked on issues of sex, gender. And so one of the things I find useful to do with Symposium is to put it in contrast with other works at the same time, because it's very easy to pick up this text and say, this is what Plato thought, or this is what the Greeks thought, as opposed to this is a multifaceted piece where each of the different characters are articulating a different perspective, all of which are working in a particular type of framework. But when we consider how something like the lover-beloved relationship works in this, or the value of love as the way to get to philosophical freedom and appreciation of the world, that these are things that are not necessarily what other Athenians thought. And so I oftentimes will think about the material conditions of this, the dramatic staging of it, talking about Socrates in this specific work. We start off with him not present at the beginning because he just sort of wanders off and thinks, and he's a fascinating character, not just for the debt that Plato and philosophy owes to him, but in a type of modeling of a type of a masculine character, right? So we hear about how during a major defeat of the Athenians and the army was en route, Socrates was sort of slowly walking backwards with his spear, menacing people, and so the rest of the men around him were able to escape and save their lives. He's a man who, when they were out on campaign, so philosophy is an embodied part of being in the Athenian lifestyle and being male and a warrior in this culture. We hear about his fantastic abilities at endurance. That he would just sort of stand for a day on end, just contemplating and thinking. And so, in approaching a text like this, I think about the afterlife of him in other Greek texts, and also in Rome as well, where the idea of what a philosopher is and what they look like is different from oftentimes how we consider philosophy now. Like if you were to say to your parents, I want to go study philosophy, it's something that they should celebrate, but they may have some doubts about the choices you're making in life. But you say, well, no, there are these amazing figures that we have that are able to harness the power of their deep thought into these amazing feats of physical and intellectual experience.
I mean, I was reading it seemed to find out like it seemed a little bit like hagiography of Socrates. It seemed to border on fan fiction at some point of just like, Plato's writing, and then let's call him Alcibiades, but
Yeah, Alcibiades.
You can say it either way,
Yeah.
Alcibiades or Alcibiades, the hard and
Alcibiades.
soft.
The bad boy that comes in all drunk, and he's just fawning over this guy, and is like kind of like upset that like you made me the lover in the lover beloved relationship. How dare you?
Well, yeah, and you have to remember, Socrates is famously ugly,
Yes,
right? And so he's another one of these
he's
characters
not traditionally attractive. So yes.
well, yeah, I mean, so his intellectual riz gets him to have all
Yes.
the hot bad boys fall for him, and so he's like, that's another thing that's fascinating about him, as well as like Odysseus and other like profoundly ugly men who then were still able to participate in this system and have people falling for him, even though Socrates does does reject it.
Yeah. But I recall from high school when we were reading Greek plays, there was some story or recollection that there was, I think it was Aristophanes, the clouds or the frogs. I can't remember where. Anyway,
Clouds probably.
clouds where Socrates is a main character in it, and they, of course, in ancient Greek, they're wearing masks, and apparently the mask was so accurate. And this is always crazy to think about. All these people in not that big of a city we're all hanging out together writing these works that we still talk about today. Something like 30, 40,000 people. And it apparently was so accurate. I don't know. It sounds like a good apocryphy. That Socrates stands up and everybody's like, wow, what a great mask that is. Exactly. Spitting image of Socrates. So, but yeah, he does seem to, he's not attractive. I think of him like kind of pig-nosed and bulging eyes and just not, but he's got a presence about him.
Yeah, well, there's always hope for us.
Yeah.
I feel like with his habit of going to random places and standing, you'd have like the little kid being like, Mom, Socrates is in the garden again. And they're like, it's okay, just take him a blanket. Just go cover him up. It's okay.
So are you advocating for like the Plato Halloween crossover?
Yes, I would be here for that. Especially if he's as unfortunate looking. Be a good.
Yeah, so instead of sort of standing in the garden and then murdering people, he's murdering bad ideas.
Yeah. He insults you. He asks you a trivia question and then insults, even if you're right.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
I always feel when I read Plato, and like there's the passion, there's the dedication, but I'm always like, when I see anyone start to argue with him, I think, don't agree with him so much. You're walking into a trap, and that you should challenge every premise that he puts forth, just on a ego level of like, don't. Of course, that's true. It is a certainty. You're just going. He's setting you up to catch you to undermine your argument in some way. And I'm always wary about. Can we all agree that this is the case? And he's just really good. Plato's rendition of that is always it's always fun to see in a very kind of intellectual text. So I was thinking, what is, and if recalling correctly, the dialogue as a form in philosophy, if I'm recalling correctly, it's one of these weird things like we have all of Plato's dialogues, we don't have any of his lecture notes, yet we have with Aristotle, who's a generation later, another famous Greek philosopher. We have his lecture notes, but we don't have any of his other writings. So this is why you read one and you read the other, and it seems very strange. One of them's kind of, it's seemingly kind of in this kind of style that's very straightforward, where this is much more dramatic. So I think it's kind of helpful for kind of philosophy is that there is a way of like showing or demonstrating philosophical debate and discourse in a text to model.
Well, with Aristotle, I was going to say that supposedly he wrote dialogues, they just didn't survive.
Yeah.
So with such a great mind as he apparently had, one would have expected perhaps great things. And of course, he went to the academy and stayed for 20 years. So you can't go to the academy for 20 years and not write dialogues, I presume. But with the Plato, though, I mean, Plato is very clear in letter 7, the one letter that often scholars have disputed, but many agree is genuine now, that Plato just says there is no writing of Platonic philosophy. There's no treatise by me, and there never will be. And I always think of that, Plato's writing dialogues is his writing, but then Plato, the author, disappears behind the writings, and mainly behind, well, I shouldn't say mainly behind Socrates. He is behind Socrates, but there are other philosophers in the dialogues. They're not given names. Well, Parmenides is. There's a dialogue picturing Socrates as a very young boy speaking with the ancient Parmenides by that time. And then there's a character named the Stranger who figures very much in the dialogue Sophist and Statesman and Theaetetus. So Plato has other quote-unquote philosophers along with Socrates, but there is no recognized philosopher, you might say,
Yeah.
beyond the name Parmenides, in terms of the dialogues. And the one of the lines I think from this letter is that the Socrates of the dialogues is a Socrates made young again and beautiful. And I always think of that as what the artist does par excellence. I mean, recreates Socrates. He recreates the story of Socrates. Although, as I tend to say it in class, there was a real Socrates. He did really live, but he didn't write anything. Except they have to put a footnote to that, because if you read the beginning of the Phaedo dialogue, on the day in which he dies, he does speak about writing some hymns to Apollo and also borrowing from Aesop's fables. So anyway, but basically he doesn't write. And then Plato writes dialogues, but not in that treatise form. And then everybody else, as it were, mostly everybody else, follows with the Aristotle treatises and the treatise form of writing.
Yeah, well, and also you have to consider that when philosophy first is born, what we call the pre-Socratic philosophers, the philosophers before Socrates,
which they didn't call them that at the time,
right? They didn't know they were before anything, right? But our earliest philosophy was written in epic meter, and so the type of so it wasn't prose, it was poetry, and it was using the form of poetry that was reserved for sacred music, as well as the commemoralization that comes from epic poetry. And so the works of these earliest philosophers were elevated in this sort of specialized speech kind of way, because philosophy is doing something different than other types of communicative acts. So the form of it, I think, is important. And then when we come to the time of Plato and writing these dialogues, we've moved from a culture which is entertainment's basically based heavily on the oral recitation of epic song and also sacred song. Sacred song probably was memorized in a way that epic was composed on the spot, much like, say, freestyle rap is. But during this time, we now have the advent of plays. So the frame of the work takes place after the Linnea, where our host has won
Agathon.
Yeah, where Agathon has won the play competition. And so having a dialogue that reflects the mass media of the time of these plays, I think is an important thing to consider. That it's and I think that it's part of the corruption of our age and the way that the way that publishing works now and the way that tenure works now, that we have less opportunity for this type of joy and fun. Because one of the things I love about this particular translation, I was telling John about this before we got started, is I think that these translators really get at the how funny it is and how light and how much joy there is in it. As we have these different speeches that present different ways of viewing love, it's still something that's entertaining to read in ways that many other philosophical texts are not.
And I think it plays up that this is a story told at least third hand. Somebody knows, and this is something that's fallen into almost legend. But it is this kind of hearkening back to the oral tradition and trying to remember things. That this is such an and there's probably embellishments, but it's such a legendary story that we have to we have to tell it and pass it along as best we can. And other things funny, I didn't pay the listener didn't pay attention to some of those arguments. They forgot about them. There's this kind of little dismissive aspect of it. So I don't know. We could get into the work itself. Thoughts?
I was, like I said, this was the first Plato that I have read in full. And I was surprised by how funny parts of it was. Even though I was really relieved for the essay in the back, because there was apparently times that they were being sarcastic that I, as a first-time reader, just didn't realize was being. Or like Diamata, the woman.
Diotima.
Yeah. I didn't realize that was a fictional creation in Socrates' head until I got into the essay, and I was like, wait a minute, she wasn't real? Yeah, the essay in the back of this was very helpful in recontextualizing what I had just read.
Well, let's consider how ironic the title is.
Yeah.
right? Because so the thing that we see right at the beginning of this is everyone's hungover and sad, and so as we begin to talk about love, they say they're not going to bring in any booze. They cast out all the women. And if we consider how
it's man talk time.
it is, well, yes, which of course, yeah. So why when you're going to talk about love, you can't have women in the room, right? But I'm being a little snide here, but one of the things to think of is in a symposium, when soon together, where people drink together, which should make every time that you go to a symposium, an academic symposium, and they don't give you drinks, then you think, aha, you're a fraud. But so they cast out the alcohol, but they also having prostitutes at your party, especially in a time when slavery was a completely common thing, where it was just seen as like any other sort of hors d'oeuvre at a party. This is kind of gross for us to think about, but the idea of like, well, let's get rid of all the ease of sexual access in order to have this intellectual conversation. I think
no distractions.
Yeah.
Well, the big symbol is the sending away of the flute girl, because the flute is the instrument of Dionysus, and so there's a party dedicated to Dionysus, in which Dionysus is banned initially, but of course you go to the end, and Alcibiades, roaring drunk, Dionysus comes back. Question
Sometimes
arises.
a flute is not a flute.
Yes, there you go.
I'm not going to lie. I was imagining, I knew that it meant like the instrument, but I was imagining like a champagne girl, that the flutes were her glasses.
Well, one can play many types of flutes. I'm sorry if we're going to get the mature rating on your podcast now.
We'll put a warning at the beginning.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I just wanted to make it clear that the terminology is.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, you're right. You're right. Yeah. And there's some reference in the essay at the back to that what you're referring to.
So I was kind of thinking about, I guess the question is, why is love a worthy subject? It seems a messy subject to talk about. But what is the appeal of trying to philosophically explain and define love?
Well, the short, I mean, I would jump to the not the answer, but to an answer that's short. I mean, love is part of human nature, and it's that part, among other things, which signifies our incompleteness. Because as Socrates criticizes Agathon's speech later on, love is not beautiful and good; it's love of the beautiful and good. But then, our whole being human is this energetic desire that goes or that can go in all kinds of directions. But love seems to be the centering of that. So if philosophy is going to be worth its way, you got to talk about the human condition, not just in some pie in the sky metaphysics like the forms and the ideas, the heavenly ideas or whatever, but really the down to earth. And of course, there again, Dionysus, down to earth, as well as Socrates. But nevertheless, it's part of the human condition. So that's why it's so important. But then that's also why Socrates criticizes the others. He says, "I thought we were to speak the truth about love. You're just making things up and speaking beautifully." Yes, he says. But if you want to hear the truth, then I can give a speech. And then, so the philosophers. There's another instance of that, going right to like he does in the Apology to his jury, to the people who are going to condemn him. He takes it right to their face, right away. I'm impious. No, you are. So the same, a kind of similar thing here with Eros. Eros is not a god; it's a daimon. So that and of course it's Diotima from whom he's learned this, which you're right. Only character, as far as we know, in a Platonic dialogue, there's no real historical. All the other characters in the dialogues are historically tuned, or one can reach into the history and find out.
Hey, John, do we have any other women in the dialogues?
Yeah, Aspasia,
Mm.
Pericles' consort, is in one of the dialogues. I'm blanking on the title right now. But anyway, there is a short dialogue featuring her.
Yeah, because I was thinking one of the things I find striking about that speech is, like, again, it's not Socrates, but Socrates reporting what the priestess told him.
Mhm.
And so that, that we have her as a conduit of the divine, but
Mhm.
also we have her as a conduit of divine in this sort of masculine space where they're discussing how love works.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And Socrates is this kind of trademark self-deprecation. Well, if we get, y'all start your love speeches first. If we get to the end and I've got nothing else to say, then we figured it out. And then he's like, I don't know anything. He's always, and I think it's interesting that it's like, it's not my argument, it's Diotima's argument. And even just nicely kind of tells Zach, I was making the same dumb arguments that you were making when I was talking to her. So he definitely throws shade, as they call it.
Mhm.
But it's a very like respectful shade, but it is nonetheless shade that, this is her argument. I'm just repeating it. But yeah,
Well, I don't know. There's part of the argument that I think is not too respectful. Because when we think of so in that speech, part of the element is part of it involves men who are pregnant in body versus those who are pregnant in mind, right? And the way that I usually sum this up to my classes is. Dumb people make meat babies, smart people make brain babies,
Yeah.
right? Because because everybody wants to touch the infinite, and so the way that animals try to touch the infinite is they have kids. Animals breed, they have kids. People breed, they have kids, but kids grow old and die, and they change, right? But ideas don't necessarily change. I mean, here we are, 2,500 years later, talking about this text, and so there is some truth to that. And so there are elements of the thing which I think are maybe a little less respectful and more aggressive in its formulation.
And it's how are there? I guess another thing to ask is, does anybody find anybody else's? Because maybe we should, anybody's argument besides Socrates a compelling one, or do they have their points? Or
Yeah, I would say they each have their points, but then there's also this irony that when Socrates makes his speech, he kind of draws from a number of the other things. And especially if you say it's Socrates' speech, but it's Socrates, as you point out, recollecting what he learned from Diotima, and that's in dialogue form. So how would Diotima know some of the things that Socrates says he's recollecting? Because she's not at the symposium.
Yeah.
Yeah,
he can't help himself. He has to frame it in a dialogue.
Oh,
He
yeah.
has to.
Oh,
He
yeah.
has to.
Yeah.
Has his interlocutors and interlocutors. He has his interlocutors, and then when he just makes up a dialogue right on the spot. So yeah, he can't. He's like anything he cooks becomes a rice bowl, but it's a great rice bowl. So.
I'm not sure about one specific that I thought had a lot of credit, but I can say the one that irritated me the most, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, was Pausanias.
Pausanias.
Pausanias. I wrote in my notes that he was reminding me of Andrew Tate with this. The best Aphrodite couldn't come from a woman,
Right.
and you common harlots, and we must love men above all else.
Yeah.
It's giving me some red-pilled Andrew Tate
Yeah,
vibes.
what's the logic that he gives there? Like, what's the point that he's trying to make?
That the older goddess that's where the more noble, soulful ideas are, whereas the younger goddess, that's where our base thoughts are.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if you push heavenly Aphrodite to the nth degree, then of course you do away with earthly Aphrodite, and therefore you do away with the human race if you push it to the nth degree. I mean, it's a denigration of that part of Eros by which we continue our kind, and everybody, animals as well as the human animal.
Yeah, and part of the thing that you are touching on with your pointing out the Tateness of it is, Tate is advocating I wouldn't really know, but from what I have heard
you have
of
a
his
base
work,
knowledge.
yes, I'm going to cover up my Tate tattoo, Tate-too, right? No, but one of the things that the logic that Tate would find in this is that you can't love something that can't be your equal, right?
Mhm.
Because if you believe that women can never be your equal, then you could never love them. And so, in part of the way that some of these arguments work, where either if you have a power imbalance between an older lover and a younger one, where you're helping bring them into society and help them, like you are in love with potential. You know, the goddess Hebe is the sort of a goddess of youthful beauty, sort of when you are the most beautiful in your life, which is when you have the most potential. So I am not going to say that Plato is of the Epstein class, but there is sort of a type of argument that you get over the hill pretty quickly when you hit 18, 19, 20, when you start losing your potential to become actualized into who you are. And so the love that Pausanias is talking about, if you extract it from the specific thing where women could never be your equal, so you could never love a woman, which seems to be actually pretty present in our discourse today a lot, in some fairly strange ways. But if you think, well, having a partner that is equal to you, or someone where you are trying to bring out the best in each other, like that is something that I think there has some value to it. But you can see how in this specific context where men and women's spheres are radically separated, where either if a woman is a sort of a freeborn woman, her primary job is to produce legitimate heirs, and that's it, right? We do have a couple examples like Aspasia, and so she's also not. I mean, she's not a legitimate character in society. Pericles' lover, right? So she's a courtesan,
Consort.
and a consort, right? So she's not a wife, and she's able to participate in these other spheres because she is not engaging in what is seen as womanly virtue, right? So I take your point about Pausanias, but I think it is reflective of sort of a larger concern, and you're pointing out the Tateness of it. I think that all comparisons are in some level odious. We have to make sure we keep the nuance, but I think there are analogies with the way that Tate views women, with how the Greeks would have understood that.
I will say that I did agree with him, though, that you can get away with more things in the name of love than you can just in general. Like if you tell somebody, hey, can I get $5? They're going to be like, why? And you're like, my wife's really hungry. And they're going to be more willing to work with you if you're saying that it's for the noble cause of love. So I did agree with him there.
Okay, so let's A/B test this. All right, so you would give a person $5 because his wife's hungry.
I'd give it either way.
Well, how much would you give if they say my dog's hungry?
However much they need. You want me to
Okay.
go buy you a bad dog of food? They still love their dog. I love their dog more than their wife, actually. So
Well, okay, and this brings me to one of my main concerns or cautions when we approach this text, right? Because part of the reason why love is something worth analyzing and discussing is because we have so many different ways that we are trying to define this human emotion, and there's a meme that floats around about how there are 6 words for love from Greece, and so they each correspond to specific different things. And if we had as many words for love as they did, or it's oftentimes paired with like, the Eskimos have 47 words for different types of snow.
Yeah.
If we had, but the thing is, we have adjectives. Right. Like it's I think that trying to get this sort of taxonomic precision of like, well, this is, agape, this is eros. Like, I think that is an artificiality that's put on this. And so when we're thinking about what they mean by love, it's a hard word to translate or consider, or even to try to figure out what that means. I teach a class called Love and War in the Ancient World. And on the very first day, I have students all jot down their definition of love and write a small example for it. And then they all read it out. And they're all different. And we have 25 students who are in the same place at the same time, usually about the same age, usually coming from similar places, but they all have these different definitions. And a lot of them don't look like the others at all. So trying to say, oh, well, we can understand when Braun translates eros as love, that we think we know what we mean by that. And as somebody who has, but part of my work is on the history of emotions, and it's very challenging to think, well, when Plato is writing eros, well, with these different characters who are presenting different understandings of the same term, are they getting at the same fundamental emotion? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, one thing we can think of is I know you have in the past talked about limb loosening
Yes.
eros, and so when we look at some of the poets who wrote about love, we can look at, well, how is the container, like how is the body responding? And so Sappho or Hesiod, who use this phrase limb loose, like when you see the person that you love and you kind of get that melty feeling, or you get butterflies in your stomach, or you start to sweat, or you can't speak. Like these are reactions on the physical container that may indicate a consonance between the way that these things work then and now. So absent of the social context where you might have Pausanias saying, "There's no way you could possibly love a woman." I mean, you got cooties and stuff; they're icky, right? But on the other hand, there may be something saying that, well, maybe there's a human physiological response that we can round up to defining as love. And so when we're thinking through this text, I think it's really difficult that we have to consider not the term, but the broader context of how each individual character is responding to it to get a larger understanding of how this particular word is being used in this work, which has 6 or 7 different, not radically different, but importantly different permutations.
Yeah, somebody pointed out, I don't remember now whether it's in the essay here or something else I'm reading, but the word eidos, which is the Greek word usually translated form, but it really literally means the intelligible look of something. But it is arguably the way being is defined. If you know something, you have its eidos or idea, our word idea. But eros is never associated with an eros. The question could be, is eros an eidos? No, it's not, apparently. It's not an eidos. So your earlier question about the argumentation stuff, I mean, philosophy's concern is to grasp things intellectually, yes, but just as with eros, you have this kind of limit business. So in the love of wisdom, presumably, you're also going to have that. And that would be, to me, maybe we could phrase it as a certain irony that, yeah, this is a philosophy dialogue, traditionally speaking. The theme is eros, but it's not eros seen as the way the idea or the eidos of the good is in the Republic. Or, to take another dialogue on love, the Phaedrus, which has thematized the beautiful, kalos in Greek. So I like what you're saying here about the context. Certainly, the text and context always go together, and a lot of times, various human attempts to understand things misunderstand perhaps more because that they don't have as good a context as what might be available or desirable. And they don't know that. So again, you're back, well, I see it this way, you're back to that Socratic awareness of ignorance.
Could I ask you, do you think that there's I know we have the form of justice, we have a form of all these different, do you think there is a form of eros?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think it's multiform.
Huh.
Like you were suggesting it. So who's given the speech? First, it's Phaedrus' speech at the beginning of the dialogue. Then it's Pausanias. Then it's Eryximachus. Then it's Aristophanes. They're all talking about, quote unquote, the same thing, but it's not simply the same. Because there is no eidos, no intelligible look that's done away with all the other attempts to make it intelligible. And then along comes Socrates, and Eros, who's been called a god, is not a god, but a daimon. An intermediate of some kind or other. A spirit, I guess, is another way to translate that in English. So this is why sometimes Plato's dialogues. Yes, the theory of forms. Plato never has Socrates use the word theory, theorein in Greek, of eidos. There is no theory of forms. There's a problem of the intelligible looks of things, the problem of the good, the true, the beautiful, even of eros. But there's not some kind of disembodied form, except in myth. Speaking of the speech of Socrates toward the end, when he speaks of the ladder, or Diotima teaches him about the ladder of love, you have that highest level, the love of the beautiful itself, by itself. What would that be? And she makes explicit it's not having anything to do with the body. Well, I don't have a chance of getting there. I'm an intellectual mind, but an embodied mind. As I keep telling my students, we are embodied minds. The mind and reason are not free-floating type of things. So, again, Socrates, Plato, putting all this stuff out for our consideration, discussion, dialogue, but not as in, okay, so you've all spent the time looking at this and that and the other, these points of view. Now, here's the truth. Yeah. There is no.
Well, and then I also find it fascinating, but Alcibiades shows up right after that, so the body comes roaring back.
Yes, right.
Sort of drunk, physical, complaining that it's not being able to have any sex with this, profoundly ugly person that he's attracted to because of his mind. So, like, as much as we try to push that aside, like, we have ascended the ladder. We first find people that we are attracted to. We then figure out our types, and then we abstract from types to thinking about philosophically, and then ultimately the contemplation of the beautiful. So at that point, we have entirely put aside, and this is actually one of the things that I think is a really important point to recall in this having taught that particular passage of the text, over and over and over again. Diotima is not saying that beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
No.
Right. Like, so, and a lot of students I will ask them to draw the ladder of desire, and then they'll come up with, it's whatever you love. And it's like, no, I mean, beauty is real, ugly is real, dry is real, wet is real. Right. So these are all things that are, that have a type of presence and reality, and not in a subjective way. And so here we've gone to the point where we have completely eliminated all the physical, and then it came just roaring back with this figure who at this point in the time that Plato was writing is a bit of a villain. Yeah. Right. He's betrayed everyone that he's been with, and and if you play Assassin's Creed Odyssey, you get a chance to meet him, but you don't get a chance to punch him in the face like I tried to. So, alas, I think it's a fault in the programming there. But yeah, so like as much as we try to shove aside the physical, we can't. I mean, it winds up being an obnoxious presence.
Was this little detail that they forgot to watch the door? They're so in their heads that they forgot the basics, and then here comes the body creeping in.
Right. You no sooner get to the beatific vision, the vision of the beautiful, when the whole thing comes crashing down. So the ladder of love, it'll get you somewhere, but back to the body is where it ultimately signified, at least by Alcibiades.
And I always think that like Plato's, and particularly this one, I haven't read them all, but the ones I've read, it is something that it is about. It's more about the process and contemplation and philosophizing and discourse than about the answer. It is about the act of philosophy. Right. That's the important thing. Right. Whether we ever get to the answer or not.
Right, and then this whole coming to know your ignorance as as a good thing from the Socratic point of view, from the get-go. But it's not just about, I know that I don't know. No, the next step is, but what if there are some things in human existence that you cannot afford to not come to know or try to know? Yeah. So there's the process again. So it's the awareness of ignorance, but then that's the stepping stone to learning, which I'm always in class always saying, that's the whole point, to get on the road to learning. Yeah, which, of course, all the students are already there on that road because they're in a university, et cetera, et cetera. So,
yeah, but I would say that this is also something that I think we moderns should remember, especially in the way that discourse has become so heated, that you can't know what you think unless you know all the different permutations of the argument, right? So instead of straw manning and shutting out the opposing arguments, you need to steel man them all, right? And yeah, you're not allowed to have an opinion unless you understand the other perspective well. So now that you understand why Tate believes what he does, do you still think that that women are incapable of love, Meghan? Is it
I've never believed women are capable of love, Dr. Chrol.
Okay.
So I wanted to just go back just a little bit because I think there is the playwright Aristophanes and his story.
Yeah.
And it's a quite famous story. And I believe this was one of the things Texas A&M banned Plato. And it may be because, and it's one of these things, like this thing's been around for 2,500 years. Plato, the Socratic dialogues were hugely influential in Christendom. This is part of the Western tradition. And you're just going to ban Plato because he has this funny little story about us having three genders and being kind of roly-poly people that just want to get back to each other. So, I don't know, thoughts on the Aristophanes, which is very humorous, but also I find humorous, obviously, but also kind of touching, even though I don't believe in soulmates.
Well, when you say touching how?
Well, that there is this severance and there's this absence of this severance and this desire for that connection to reunite and finding the right person to reunite with. It's a nice fairy tale, I suppose.
Yeah.
I just picture cute little meatwads just running around, just happy. I don't know if you all, or if it was a little too late, but the old show Oswald, I was right in that time period. He's a blue octopus, and he's just the happiest little guy. He has all of his, 8 legs, and I'm like, I wonder if that's what those Greeks were talking about. Just a cute little sweet octopus.
I mean, it also plays on this kind of nostalgia of we were once happier. If we could just go to the before when we were together with whatever our gender was and loved.
Committing regular sacrilege and offending the gods and so yeah, sure. That sounds like a great time.
It's kind of pre-Apollo time. the Dionysian, as you were kind of touching on.
Yeah, well, I mean, if the Aristophanes primordial humans were very powerful, so powerful that they could attack the citadel of the gods. But then, again, I always play upon the Greek myth dimension and say, but if you commit an act of hubris, an act of overstepping your bounds, attacking the gods, there will be a nemesis sooner or later. It's written in the stars, so to speak. Well, I don't know if it is, but anyway, that's the way I kind of understand it. So when Zeus cuts them in half, he punishes them, and he doesn't kill them, but he punishes them. But then he also adds a little bit later in the story, Aristophanes tells that, and if you people don't learn your lesson, if you try this again, I'll cut you yet again, and you'll hop around on one leg. So it's very funny, but it does show that there are limits to the human condition. But then the flip side of all that is, in his speech, when he speaks about Apollo, and that's the one that the god he does refer to as the healer, that it's Zeus has Apollo heal the incision where the cut was made, and leaving the navel as a sign of our former overstepping of bounds. And again, you have the whole play arguably back to the sign of Apollo and the Oracle of Delphi, with the command to know oneself written over the temple gates, and to be moderate or nothing in excess. So I always think of Plato as writing all this with these things that we have come to know about ancient Athenian culture in the background. Certainly the first time I came across the Plato stuff, I mean, wasn't that aware of all that Greek stuff in the background, but it's arguably very important. But so this speaks to this notion of learning your limits, so that you can seek your other half. Later on, Socrates, Diotima, that's one of the things he says that how would she know? But Socrates says, and if it's as been said, love is the seeking of one's other half. He said, it's not just it's the good because it's good. So it's kind of not as simple as maybe just if you take the Aristophanes speech and look at it by itself for the moment. If only I could reach my other half. So it leaves the creativity is always itself in process and multidimensional.
Yeah.
Is there only the one and only one? Probably not.
Yeah.
It just depends. I mean, you're back to your context, text and context type of thing.
Well, yeah, and I would also say that with the, Aristophanes was a comic playwright, and it's a funny story.
He's still funny.
And I think part of the thing that I find strange about Texas banning this text or preventing somebody from teaching this in a gen ed class,
Texas A&M.
to
be specific.
is he's not being proscriptive; he's being descriptive.
Yeah,
like he is.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if you think that in this text, the type of love that is valorized is between men, you have to explain why men like women sometimes, or why women like men. Like so it's he's coming up with an explanatory story for something that people observe in the world. That there are, so it's not saying you should do this or you should do that. He's just like, yeah. I mean, if why would a guy, like a why would a man like his wife? Why would he possibly want to engage in these Cody-born reactions with somebody else? But he's just there. There's a reason for it. So he's not saying this is how you do it. Now, I will say that other parts may be more problematic to folks who are who have the perspective of the administrators and legislators there, such as the way that you want to never do something shameful in front of the person you love, right? That one thing that love does, because earlier, John, you described love as an engine, that this is sort of an engine to the good, always trying to make you do better. And we do have the example of the Theban Sacred Band, which was it was a group of soldiers who were all lovers, like they all had their pairs, because the idea was you don't want to show that you are going to express cowardice in front of the enemy because the person that you love, you don't want to let them down. And so there are ways that I can see if you are someone who objects to Aristophanes, well, you might actually object to the part that says, no, I mean, fighting men should all be in love with each other as a way of making them a more efficient fighting force, which we do have an example of in the ancient world.
And just like it seems historically, whether it is erotic or not, the connection of people who fight in combat situations, it seemed to your band of brothers, which always has certain, this is a connection that is greater than any love you could have.
Yeah, well, I will also say that we oftentimes focus on the sex part of things, but this is, again, one of the places where from other context of this time, that the idea of the sexual contact was seen as potentially staining or a challenge to the younger partner. So, for example, one of the tyrants of Athens. So Athens had a brief period of democracy, and then a tyrant took over. And as the story goes, and I'm not going to be too vulgar here, but I'm going to be just vulgar enough again. If you are watching this with your child, you may want to skip forward by about 2 minutes. So as the story goes, the tyrant has his young protege. He comes, Harmodius walks in with wine for everybody else, all the guys, and the tyrant says to the boy, boy here, sort of 16, 18, sort of that sort of younger age, before they become a majority and join the world. So he says to his protege, I'm surprised you're not pregnant with how much I've inseminated you. At which point, the guy grabs a sword and runs him through, and the democracy is reestablished in Athens, right? So when we look at this system and we think, oh, well, this is the social system, there are all these, but the fact of the sex itself was something that drove this guy to kill the tyrant, right? So I think it's one of these sort of complicating things as we're working through this system, that we know that sex is present, like that's an important element of that story, but also we can see that in the context of this time, it also was something that could have brought shame upon the partners, right? So it's something that happened but is not acknowledged. So.
Well, I mean, I do think it is. It's a thing that the context. There's quite a few references. There's a lot of quotes from the Iliad and the Odyssey in it. So it is, even in its time. We think about like postmodern text referencing other. This is very much it's referencing other texts from ancient Greece, and then as you're almost Socrates does a remix of everybody else's argument at the end. He's taken it all in and made something else, which again is the discourse, the developing of the argument and things like that. So
yeah, and I think that in a sort of a psychic slot, like the way that oftentimes people will quote the Bible, you can quote Homer, and he's the big dog.
Yeah,
and so folding in these references are not him being snooty, but it's being pop culturally and speaking a language that everyone else understands.
Yeah, and again, things like Greek theater, everybody was familiar with the stories, so it's things like Sophocles is played rife with irony. Like we all know how this story ends, so we're just gonna, how it ends, but let's see how much irony I can pack into this 50 page play or whatever. It is something that in some ways it's something that still feels modern and relevant because it's very gossipy and it's very intellectual at the same time. So, any final thoughts anyone had? I've had a great, and keep in mind when you're looking at a work like this, if you're in a class, you're gonna at least several classes, a week or two to work on it. How many?
5 or 6.
5 or 6 classes. So
no, weeks.
5 or 6 weeks.
Yeah. Now we had a lot of snow, but nevertheless.
Yeah. That's a deep dive.
Right.
So, any last minute thoughts and reflections that y'all have about?
Well, I will jump in so that you can have the last word. I think that when we're approaching a text like this, again, to bring this to the modern day, thinking about how much joy and fun and play is present in it, because a lot of times people feel like they've got to put on their put on a jacket and tie to read philosophy. But no, this is trying to investigate what you are experiencing and feeling. And one of the reasons why Plato is such a joy is because we have multiple different perspectives that are being brought up, and so being able to admit and being willing to accept the joy of this intellectual adventure, as well as being able to want to consider all different perspectives. I think it's one of the reasons why Plato and this work in particular is worth reading. It's not just old, and it's not just difficult. Sometimes it takes a second or third reading. Sometimes it takes a little bit of extra thought at it. But I think that it's worth doing. And as far as a short text to get yourself into things, this is an excellent short text.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a drama. It's philosophy. It's literature. It is a bizarre love statement. It's got a lot. This is about 60 pages. The text itself in this edition, and usually they run about 50, 60 pages. And I don't want to particularly shout out this edition, which is very good and doesn't overwhelm you. It gives you good endnotes. It doesn't overwhelm you with endnotes. It's just a very nice edition that they put a lot of good work into. So encourage that.
All right, John, final word. What's the last thing?
Meghan, did you have thoughts?
It was definitely funnier than I expected it to be. I actually read the Symposium, and then I went and read Spark Notes to make sure I understood, I got the gist, and then I read the essay. So I feel like I've read 3 different tellings of this, and I still don't know if I fully grasped everything. But it was interesting to think about.
Well, yeah, and using those assistants are useful. And now here I'm not advocating you use the Adobe summary. That's not what I'm
No.
saying. Humans interpreting humans is really nice, and there's plenty of it out there because these people have been dead long enough that there's not even their descendants can get money from us, right? So way out of copyright, very easy and approachable, and so and people have been thinking about this stuff. So yeah, I think that actually is something worth doing. That if you don't think you got it, read it. Read the summary interpretation, and then you can go back through it again, and you'll have more hooks on it. So yeah, I think that's. So you looked a little sheepish there, but you shouldn't be sheepish.
Yeah. Because I was like, people study this, make their whole career trying to figure. And I'm like, okay.
And of course, we would like to give you the last word, John.
I don't remember the source of this, but I remember hearing or learning somewhere sometime back in the day that when Plato died, his family or those around him found under his pillow the comedies of Aristophanes. Not dialogues, not Aristotle's treatises, but the comedies of Aristophanes. And I've always thought that as a marker for the fact that Plato, some would argue, the greatest philosopher, certainly early Western culture. But of course, there are different opinions about that too, since Aristotle's name is mentioned. But Plato was really a philosopher poet, and the dialogues offer that reading of him. Yes, philosophy, very, very important, but it's in context of the poetic tradition. And I've often had to deal with that type of thing. Well, if you're doing philosophy, philosophy is philosophy, and that's not myth and poetry. Well, read Plato. Yes, it is, in various ways.
Yeah.
But yes, I don't know if that story is true, and I don't know whether it comes from Diogenes Laertius or whoever, but that Plato was found on his deathbed with the plays of Aristophanes under his pillow. It's a nice image.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, I think there was the end conversation of like Socrates talking about somebody who should write drama should be able to write comedy.
Very good.
And it had that kind of like, isn't Plato doing that?
Yes.
In a way, doing both comedy and tragedy, drama.
I would agree. Yeah.
Well, thank you all very much for your time. And with everybody, we just wish you the best through the rest of the semester. Thank you for coming on here, and thank you for watching. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and share.